So thank you, Claire, for joining me on this call today. I wanted to have this conversation of connecting different professionals that work with students and children and youth, whether they're from different backgrounds. With my role in Special Compass, I work a lot with students and parents, more on the academic side. And sometimes I don't really, more on the academic side, but I feel like a lot of my work also, I realize there's a lot of other important components beyond the academics that also help students to succeed. So I wanted to do this project, kind of talk about like the different sides of learning and talk about the different people that are involved in this kind of whole process.
Great.
So it's with great pleasure to have you, Claire, today, an art therapist, to talk about the importance of mental health and emotional well-being, not only for adults, but with children and youth.
For sure.
So, I'll give you some, so if you don't mind, just introduce yourself and let us know more about you.
Sure. So my name's Claire Nicholls. I came into art therapy late on a bit of a crooked trail, but I think that all the sort of paths that I took have converged into something that's really quite amazing. So I started my career as a graphic designer, but I had my own company and I had kids, and it just didn't work. Like the 24/7 kind of environment was just not something I could accomplish with two young children. So I started teaching art and I set up a studio, and I've been running a studio for 15 years.
Oh, wow.
And then about probably 10 years ago, 8 years ago, I was really noticing that a lot of parents were coming to me, not just with accolades about, oh, like my kid can draw or something like that, but that some of the habits that we created and the positive self-esteem that they had just from gaining skills, not even in the arena of learning, but in an environment where they could have successes, and that it was translating well into the classroom for them. And they were noticing, the parents were even commenting that they were, you know, more attentive at home, and just that real improvements across the board. And I had a few, two clients, students who were on the spectrum, and it just really hit me that there was something going on more than just, you know, putting a paintbrush to paper, that people were really having. And I know for my own personal times of ups and downs that I really feel better when I create something. And that doesn't necessarily mean like a painting. It could be like cooking a fun dinner, or like building a dresser, like it just, or putting together IKEA furniture. Like really, I'm very open about what my interpretation of creative is. And so, sorry, things just keep coming up. So, yeah, so I looked into, I had no idea even what art therapy was. Like I'd never heard of it. And, you know, I really didn't even know when I started what door I was opening, but it's been a wonderful journey. So in 2015, I went back to school and did my, it's like a master's equivalent at the Toronto Art Therapy Institute, and finished my thesis for that, which did, I don't know if you had a chance to look at, if I sent you anything over, but my thesis is a TDSB protocol that is for children of divorce, and it's like a prevention program that takes them through steps to improve resiliency. So I finished that in 2018, and I had great experiences with my placements. So I got placed at Hicksdale Crest. So I worked at the Children's Mental Health Agency, which is now Sick Kids Mental Health Agency. And I work at Eastdale treatment centers. I work in the Section 23 school that is in the Covenant House. And I also now work on their acute suicide unit and their outpatient unit, and perhaps doing stuff with camp. So I still keep up with my instructional art side of things, because I don't know, I find I need it. Like, I find I need an educational component, even though I think with working with students, I know that it's not necessarily the party line for art therapists, but I feel that aesthetics matter to kids for how they feel about their work. They kind of need to, like, you know, like they have discouraging thoughts around it, and you can try and dissuade them that, like, it doesn't matter what it looks like, but they care about what it looks like. So sort of building skills in that area, I think, is always positive. And also keeping, like, when I work with the youth that I work with at Youthdale is 16 to 19. Like, talk about a tough audience to engage. Like, they're really, you know, they're not attending a regular school at a regular basis. So really, I really try to pull out all the stops when it comes to materials for things like that, and get them to get involved in interesting projects. So I've even worked with some kids with dyslexia. I have dyslexia myself. My daughter has dyslexia. So I'm like, well, she's a triple diagnosis, so gifted, LD, and ADHD. So I'm familiar sort of with all that world. And so I've done some work with texture with kids with dyslexia, doing like sandpaper letters. And we've also done stuff where I've metal stamps that you can stamp into leather, and they can write poems, but then they can feel it. It's just like really just sort of trying. I really, so I haven't come up with the right term for it. I'm not sure, like, if you'll know this reference, but do you know the television show, like, Pimp My Ride? Like, I know that sounds good. Okay, so there's no other way to describe it, but that's what I feel like I often do, is I'm trying to take a lot of maybe older art therapy techniques and really trying to give some new life into them. So I do a lot of work with superheroes as well. And so I actually went to the US and had training with Dr. Scarlett Johansson for superhero therapy. So I've received my training for that. So I don't know. I just have a lot of weird angles that I go at stuff with.
So that is really, like, that was a lot of great information and a great story and a great journey. And it's interesting because I feel like I could dissect this in from so many different, like, angles of what you just said. So one thing is that I love your story, your journey, how you said that, you know, kind of, you started off in graphic design, but this is how you went. You did the entrepreneur route. You went to art, you got your did your thesis in art therapy, and how everything came together to fit to create this new career for yourself. For sure. And I know from my personal experience, as well as, so now I'm, in the last couple of years, I volunteered as a career mentor at York University. And it's interesting to see students on that end of the spectrum, because, I mean, they're studying something for like the last 4 years, and, you know, whether they're doing it in commerce or social sciences, whatever, and now they got to go into the job force, the work market, right? And usually students at that point think, okay, what am I supposed to do with, like, this degree? How am I supposed to make it? But it's kind of like they're trying to unite their passion but still survive and make a profit. And it's like, and sometimes I know for myself, I found myself in that kind of crossroads, like, how do I turn this into something that I love it so much, but I need to eat at the end of the day? Like, how can I blend the two? And I really feel like I found that with Special Compass, to be honest with you. So I think that's very important to share, because one of the workshops I do is helping students to transition, especially from high school to post-secondary. And a lot of the time, young children, especially now in Ontario, when in grade 8, they got to select whether they want to be on the applied or academic, right?
I find that so challenging.
It is challenging. Like, we are demanding so much from such a young person at a very young age, and it puts them into this box. So I really commend you and thank you for sharing that, because I think we need more stories like this of helping children understand. So yeah, you could start in the sciences, but doesn't mean that you're going to end up
For
like
sure.
at the end of the day in the sciences. You marry your interest in science and photography and
Yeah.
come up with this great new career that fulfills what you need, like your passion, your heart brings your heart joy, as well as be able to
For
provide
sure.
a meal at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like there's a lot of discussion about that. To kind of go back a little bit, so I wanted, for people that may be just listening in for the first time and hearing this term art therapy, how would you define art therapy?
I find that it's a medium that allows people to express themselves and self-reflect in an unfiltered way. We're so used to preparing what we say that we put on the brakes a lot about different things, particularly if it's a challenging subject matter. And I find we haven't had enough exposure at drawing, like doing it in another creative way. And it could be, putting together a poem, and it doesn't have to be pen to paper in that sort of way, but doing something a different way tricks, I think, your mind into they put up less hurdles. So stuff that comes out, you go, oh, like that was in there, like I relate to that. And I think it just gets you out of your own way, right? Where you could be, and I think too, it's for kids with anxiety, who I work with quite a bit. It takes a lot of imagination to be anxious. Like you really have to work very hard to think up all these things. And so most kids who are anxious have an imagination that you can redirect quite well. And that I find is empowering for kids. And then when you're looking at sort of the ability empowering kids, I find that you can use it as a visualization that can work through problem solvings of, say there was bullying at school or whatever it was, and they had an interaction, it didn't go well, and we can do like a comic book of, well, okay, so how would we want this to go? So it can leave you with like sort of more of a resolved memory, especially if it was something that was troubling, right?
Right.
So it allows you to rewrite your story and not necessarily be the victim or, sorry, I keep using my hand.
No, it's okay.
I'm
I'm the same way too. And I've noticed because now we're all digital, like my hand gestures are over here. So no one can see my hand. So I'm like, oh, I gotta bring it back in. And kind of like make it smaller. But no, you said like some really, really important things there, like just even talking about anxiety and how children and youth with anxiety have an imagination. I kind of feel, usually I'm always the one, I feel like, advocating for children and youth mental health, because there's so much conversation about mental health among adults, but we're not really talking about the mental health among youth. And many, we're not living in a perfect fairy tale world here. Unfortunately, there are a lot of youth that are experiencing some adult situations that I probably never experienced or will in my life. And they're holding this baggage. I was having a conversation last week too with someone else. We're talking about just a lot about the racism and everything that's going on. And I said, one of the things that people need to realize too is that children are experiencing things on the playground or in the classroom at school. Many different, it doesn't have to be something like racial or like related to racism, but they're experiencing many different things, and they cannot put that emotional backpack down the way they just drop off their school supplies when they come home. Sometimes they're carrying this and they just don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to express it. They don't know how to even vocalize or make sense what this is going on. And that's when you start seeing many other different signs. So I kind of want to, I guess, touch back too about recognizing those signs, because I know that everyone's busy. you know, especially mom and dad, if you have like multiple kids, you probably say, how's school today? And they're like, fine. But then you're just like, wait, was it really fine? Or is there something you're not telling me? So how could, like, as parents recognize that maybe there's some signs of, maybe they're holding something in, or that's time to talk or help them learn to express?
You know, it is so personalized, right? How people explore, but I find children have limited resources. Like they're either going to disrupt, right? Like how will self-sabotage, if I'm going to be the kid who's the bad kid, I can do that, and here you go, like, and push back, and you don't know. And then you can get a pleaser as well, and you can also just get a kid withdrawing, right? So I think listening to your own spidey senses when you know your own kid, and you know when the reactions, just there's something a little bit funny, like fine might sound different on the day, you know, like just being, I think paying attention to those little cues can be helpful, because I do think it manifests in all sorts of ways, right? But I think the misbehaving, like I mean, from a personal point of view, like I know with my own children, like when particularly my eldest, if we start to butt heads, I'm like, oh, wait a second, like something's going on, right? Like I can tell, like it sometimes takes me a minute to click into that, but you could just sort of get that feeling, trusting, I guess, those feelings.
That's really good. I'm glad you said about trusting, because a lot of the time I do have like parents or families come to me wanting to know if, like, say for example, there is a suspect that their child may have a learning disability, and the school's kind of bringing it up, and sometimes parents are just not too sure if this is something, like, if they really have a learning disability, like, should we investigate this, or is my son or daughter being targeted, or they're just trying to make a big deal and like streamline them into a classroom. And I always say trust, like I always tell parents, like, you just need to trust your instinct. Like you're the parent at the end of the day, you know your child best. And you know, understand, like, because I mean, if you, depending on everyone's situation is different, but assuming you've been for them when they're a baby, you understand their different moods and like what's going on. So I think that's really key, and I think that's really important even for myself as an adult to even remember to trust my senses, or that little spidey senses and stuff.
I threw in the superhero, I had to.
So can you explain a little bit more about that? Because I'm actually interested.
So the superhero therapy, it really ties in pop culture. So like it could be something like Harry Potter or Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or like superhero stuff. And really there's in storytelling, there are lots of archetypes, and in superheroes they're really exaggerated, you know, so that you can really see a villain versus, you know, something else. And so using those as well-known figures to maybe be the subject of a particular directive. So I do one around anger management and the Hulk, and it talks about like expanding that time in between Bruce Banner and the Hulk and seeing what we can do. Like, so I actually do a folded paper. So I work very symbolically. So I'd fold a piece of paper so that two bits are showing and there's a hidden other bit. And it's like, draw yourself as, you know, your calm self, draw yourself as your full on Hulk. And then we open it up and problem solve as to, well, what does it feel like? I feel like my hands get clenched or whatever it is. And then we'll break down what can help them in those situations. So you can assign like sidekicks of people who, you know, so there's lots of different metaphors that you can use throughout. So yeah, by identifying some sidekicks of people that are really good, that they can trust it when they're having a problem, that these are the people who are helpful for them, and identifying them and coming up with
That sounds so awesome and cool, to be honest.
Yeah, it's super cool. Like, when I was like, I was just like, I get to do this for my job. Like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
I would have never thought about like the whole, like the Hulk, like I was picturing it, you know, where you start before and when you go up to the Hulk and helping students to problem solve. Because interesting enough, I feel like this is also a common problem I find with the academics and helping students with learning disabilities, is not that they're not able to do the work, it's just breaking down the task and understanding what to do in the middle.
Absolutely.
And I think that is essentially, like, I feel like a lot of my work and training is helping kids to break down that whole learning process.
Absolutely, yeah.
Helping them to understand, okay, well, this is what the question's asking, this is what we need to do, these are the steps, helping them to understand how their unique mind works and putting it all together, I guess putting this masterpiece together to create the final product, right? So it's very interesting to hear all this and just see the different ways that not even just as youth, but I feel like as adults, that kind of break down the whole process of problem solving. And an important word you said too was self-reflecting. That was a key thing, I think. You said self-reflecting and helping people to, like, guess, uncheck or come out of this box of this construct about how we should behave and kind of how we should be acting.
Yeah.
I feel like it's the same thing with comes to students with learning disabilities, or I should say students with exceptionalities in general. Right. There is this kind of box of like how we should be learning and how you should be performing. And if you don't fit into this box, then something is wrong with you. When the more I dive into my studies, so I should say that I'm working on my minor in inclusive education, and that's essentially how I got into everything. A little bit of that as well as my own personal experience. And a lot of the things have kind of opened up my mind, and I'm aiming to pursue a master's as well too in education, and kind of explore more holistic ways of learning and understanding how the brain takes information naturally, and how do we create teaching strategies and content that helps to foster that holistic path of learning.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
well,
so
I totally believe in that.
Yeah,
I've come at it from so many different angles that I know, you know, I've used all sorts of tools that I wouldn't have thought, you know, that weren't necessarily about the psychotherapy of art therapy. It's just, there's so much going on that you bring.
Yeah, and that's, so when you were saying how with helping your daughter and like students with dyslexia to do this, the spelling, you said it's like sand spelling. That's actually one of the tips I've been using in one of my workshops too, telling parents, like, we need to get out of this construct of like learning to spell is repeating words on paper a million times, right? It's not really engaging all the senses, and I always tell people we need to engage more senses in our learning, because that's how we're going to able to retain more information and help to create it to be more long-lasting knowledge. So I think that's awesome. And I'm just like, even just listening to you and just everything, it's just reminder how like it's the simple things. Like, this is like the little simple things that we could do that make a big difference overall.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So what would be a tip for somebody that, let's say right now, or just a tip in general to kind of help us to kind of de-stress and relax, especially like in this kind of little new norm we're living in, right?
Well, I think, a lot of times, and this is more to the adults, because I think kids are having their own issues, but I think a lot of parents are facing things that they didn't expect around the challenges that are happening right now. And sometimes we need to tap into our playful young self. And, so a lot of times as adults, we don't have the tools at hand if we don't practice art. You don't have the stuff around. But just, I don't know, I encourage people, especially with their family members, to make something, like make a go-kart. I don't know, like, honestly, like creating anything, make dinner together. Like, I do find those sharing of creating together things can do whatever, can really help people flip into a different mode. And they call it flow, right? Like, when you get lost in something, and it's so easy to choose to get lost in Netflix or something, right? Like, and we want to check out, and it's just giving people another way to check out, even if it's like, I love doodling. I find that can be, just if you've got a piece of paper while you're on a meeting, and just to be able to move your hand can even keep different parts of your brain active. So, I'd say that's a big one. And like, look for ways to be creative that aren't necessarily the predictable ways, right? It helps so much with your ability to problem solve is to manage that you don't have everything the way you want. I mean, if everything was the way we want, we wouldn't be forced to be so creative to kind of get stuff to happen, right? Like,
that is true. That's so true. So I want to share this with you. Hold on. One of my projects, it's funny because I'm learning to tap into more of my creative self the way I was when I was a kid. I used to do so many crafts.
I know, yeah.
And it stopped. And then one day, out of this whole, when we're in this whole pandemic, I just woke up and I said, I'm going to do paper mache.
Nice.
So this is the start of like my little paper mache project.
Oh, good. I love that there's even like COVID was in there. Isn't that funny?
I didn't even recognize that. So I'm trying to make a paper mache brain.
Nice.
So this is my first step, and you know what? It just challenged me. And the funny thing is that when I was working on this, maybe in the morning, I was just like so stressed. I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. So then I'm just like, I'm just gonna work on this. And then as I'm going, like, I'm just like, everything just melting away. I'm like, yeah.
I know, and it opens your mind to accept other possibilities. I find sometimes when we're task oriented and getting through the day, like, it's just, I'm going this way, this is the direction, I have to take one step, blah, blah, blah. And I think when you drop into something creative, it opens that up to being like, actually maybe everything doesn't have to be this one way, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that is like me in a nutshell. So this is very insightful. I love this. So if anyone wants to, so I should back up. So do you work privately or do you work through?
Well, so I had been working, I ran a studio. And I see kids in after school programs.
Okay.
So that's been like suspended, right? Like, I don't know when that's happening again. So I sort of have lots of different pieces. Yeah. So I don't, right now, I don't see private art therapy clients, but would. Like, it's weird for this to be happening pandemic wise, because I just started practicing in 2018. Yeah, so even though I've been dating, so I'm still putting my pieces together. Yeah. So I think the school, I mean, I'm not going to be back in the schools, which is the majority of the work I do. So I would be taking on people individually. I'm also building a couple of programs. So I'm building an app that is just sort of a self-directed mental health self-reflection tool. Cool. So, and it's art therapy based. So, yeah, that's how I'm spending my days, I guess. And I still see a few clients over Zoom through the outpatient work at USTL. Yeah.
Cool. That is amazing. Keep me posted on that app. I'd love to know.
Thanks. It's all based on tarot cards. It's all archetypes from Jungian like psychology. So it's I'm enjoying it. I'm illustrating them as well. So it's a nice little project. Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Keeping you busy, obviously.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much for taking your time once again. I don't know if there's anything else you want to share, or
no, I mean, I guess at the beginning of the pandemic, I did put together some daily prompts to help people, and I tried to include materials that they might have available. Like I did a watercolor painting using food coloring and things like that. So they're all on my website if people wanted to have some, inspiration. I think there's a lot out there, but this was sort of pandemic specific. I did one a day for about 3 weeks. And
nice.
So that's, the videos are there too. Yeah.
Okay. So you want to share your website with us?
Sure. It's picassosgarage.com.
Okay, picassosgarage.com. Okay, I'll make sure to include that in the notes as well too. But thank you so much, Claire, for joining us on this call. It was a great conversation, and I'm happy to learn this new side of learning.
Lovely. Well, it was very nice to meet you too, and your work sounds so inspiring. If we can ever work together, I'd really enjoy that. It sounds like really great work.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.